So my main area of research is personality broadly defined. And to me, personality research I call it the last refuge of the generalist. I can do whatever I want, and it's actually, my colleagues think I'm doing personality. So partly I study the structure of personality and the structure of emotion, and I've been developing techniques for doing this using the web. And we've been doing this for 5 years now or so, in which we are using the web to collect data using a very old technique that no one actually has been using for a long time, of random sampling. So we, in fact, have about 250,000 people we've collected data from over the years, looking at each person just is asked a few items, and we're asking both standard personality items, standard interest items, as well as ability items. So we have an open source intelligence test we use also that we've been developing. And one of the themes of all this work is doing open science. So we try to get publicly available open source items of both ability, interests, and standard personality. And we try to use techniques, open source techniques, and particularly I like the statistical package R, for instance, which allows us to use these open techniques and publish the results, publish the methodology. The results show the structure of personality is more complicated than people used to think. Historically, people have talked about 3 to 5 to 7 dimensions of personality. But it turns out if you have enough power, such as 250,000 people, that you can get the microstructure, you can get it down to a much more complicated structure, actually at the item level. So items allow us to predict and better understand things such as attitudes towards crime. It's not just the broad concept of openness or liberalism, but it turns out it's a few specific items. We've been looking, for instance, at where people choose to live and what kind of college major do people like, what kind of occupation do they go into. And you can describe those at a very broad level in terms of personality, interests, and ability. And you can also describe it at the micro level of the specific items that relate to attitudes toward are you willing to live in an economically diverse community? We used to think this was sort of liberalism, but it turns out no, it's a particular attitude towards crime. If you don't worry about crime very much, you're more willing to live in an economic diverse community. Also, we've been using this technique to predict health-related things, such as how heavy are you, your body mass index. And people have this theory, well, it's lack of conscientiousness or it's neuroticism. Well, it turns out, no, the best thing that predicts how heavy you are is the simple item, do you eat in your car? It's just sort of these obvious items at the item level rather than at the more macro structural level of personality. But we've become, using our web-based technique, very interested in how economic backgrounds, so for instance, we have parental education and parental occupation, how that predicts your choice of college major, how that leads to and predicts your occupation. Now, these are cross-sectional, so I use the word predict somewhat incorrectly because these are correlated with, because these are just cross-sectional data. But it's the striking effect, this is not surprising to people in HCEO, that economic background makes a real difference in all kinds of opportunities one's exposed to, and also how one takes advantage of those opportunities. We've looked at sort of conventional personality as well as ability, and also interests. It turns out interests are probably a better predictor of many of these outcomes than are standard measures of personality, and actually it's better than some standard measures of ability. Within ability, we've been looking at this, we're looking at college major and also occupation. And college majors differ a great deal in their estimates of ability, ranging from physicists who are very, very able to other fields that don't have quite the ability to solve abstract reasoning problems. And we cross that with sort of our standard measures of personality. And when you get there, you have a difference at the structural level, what's called within subjects or between subjects or between groups of subjects. So for instance, there's this fascinating observation, in my opinion, fascinating, that although at the individual level, most of the personality dimensions are fairly independent and fairly independent of ability. At the college major level, the very smart college majors tend to be very disagreeable. The average physicist is very smart and very disagreeable. However, within physics, and this is true of many of the natural sciences, within those fields, there's no correlation between agreeableness and ability. So you can tell, I have a number of physics friends, and I tell them my results, and I always hasten to add that you're a very nice physicist. It doesn't mean I think you're not a very smart physicist, because within physics, there's no relationship. But physicists are generally among the smartest majors we have, that we've found, and almost the most disagreeable. I think the computer scientists are actually our most disagreeable. And this doesn't mean that they're nasty people. This means sort of on a standard scale of agreeableness, they don't tend to be as nice. People who are high school and elementary school teachers are very sweet people, it turns out, and are very agreeable, but it's almost as if you have personality or you can have ability, which is a strange way of putting it, since I think of ability as part of one's personality. What I'm finding really exciting, and it's happening in the field just in the last several years, is the change in technology. And I've spoken at many different meetings about how much of science is driven by changes in technology. So I use the example of Galileo, his real trick was he developed a telescope, and that just literally revolutionized science. And oceanography was revolutionized by this echo sounder, for instance. And psychology has been revolutionized by the use of the smartphone, which is a way of collecting data within subjects, or the use of computers to collect data on the web. And this has just completely changed the way we collect data and think about data. So I said I study the structure of mood and emotion. We can do this now with smartphones. We ask people, all of our subjects have smartphones, and we text them and ask them to fill out a short questionnaire. We do this several times a day, 5 or 6 times a day for several weeks. Then you can look at the structure within that person of emotion. And it turns out people differ systematically in their structure of emotion. For some people, what makes them tense makes them tired. Other people, what makes them tense makes them excited and energetic. It turns out there's stable characteristics we can predict who gets tense and tired. These are people who view the situation as threatening. The people who view the situation as challenging, when they're tense by doing a task, like being videotaped, they also get very energized. And because they see it as a challenge rather than as a threat. And so at the broader between-person level, you have this observation of there's stable individual differences, what we call personality traits, but those relate at the within-subject level. They relate to the structure of how your moods, your emotions, your choice of situations. Just this morning, I was working with a former student. We were looking at what are the situations you choose to be in as a characteristic, as a function of your personality. And then when you're in that situation, how do you feel in that situation? And they're very stable differences in terms of obviously, outgoing people tend to be in social situations more than not so outgoing people. But how do they feel when they're in those situations? That the less outgoing person, more introverted person, feels more tense in that situation, as you sort of would expect. But they can be in those situations. Sometimes they have to be. But when they're in those situations, their emotional reaction is somewhat different than the person who likes to be in those situations and chooses those situations. So we're looking at how stable personality relates to how rapidly you change in your emotions and your thoughts and your behaviors over time in various situations. And this is partly, we're able to do this partly because we have this modern technology. We have the cell phone. We have apps to do this. You can collect within subject data over time. And that's truly a revolutionary thing happening in psychology. The use of the web, which we've used also, I've been using that for a long time, to collect data has also changed the way you think. There are several labs, we're one of them, that we have hundreds of thousands of subjects who come in voluntarily to take our questionnaires because they want to know about themselves. It's bizarre. We do not advertise our website, but we give people feedback. And we have 50 to 100 to 200 people a day come in to fill out our questionnaires. We tell them basically what they already told us. If they tell us, I feel fairly anxious when I'm with people, and we say, oh, you're kind of an anxious person. They think we're brilliant, where in fact, we're just telling them just what they told us. And it's embarrassing how simple it is. But this allows us to then relate those characteristics that they've told us about how anxious, how outgoing, how conscientious, how agreeable, how open to new experience they are. We can relate that to things such as their major, their occupational choice, their economic background, their current situation. And this allows us to try to tease out what are the best factors that predict, we hope, predict future personality. The biggest issue right now in the literature is, in fact, this whole notion of open science and replicability. I was just a brown bag on this, that personality is interesting because, in the sense that we tend to have very replicable results, partly because we tend to have bigger sample sizes. And the power of the sample size, we don't tend to talk about really small effects. We tend to talk about fairly large effects that are very robust in the sense, because of our sample sizes, we know they're statistically very significant. But this has led to the push towards more open materials and open methods. So I've been very involved, along with a number of people, with pushing for open statistical methods, open statistic techniques. The language R, for instance, I use a lot, and I've done some I think a fairly useful package in R called the Psych package that is meant for, very selfishly, it's meant for so I can analyze my own data, but it turns out many people across many different fields find some of those open applications very useful. Similarly, we use open items, and we use something from what's called the International Personality Item Pool, sometimes called the IPIP, and this is an open set of items that is drawn from almost all the major personality inventories. But because it's an open set, we can use it without problem of copyright, and we can explore the structure and go further on that. And with one of my former students, David Condon, we've been doing a lot of work on doing the same thing for the ability. So we're working with some people in the UK and also in Germany on an NSF grant where we're developing an international cognitive ability resource. The idea of, can we give away intelligence tests? Can we give away items that are open source that any researcher can use? And they can study intelligence without having to use a proprietary instrument, which is quite expensive. And can they just do this with quick surveys? And the answer is yes, they can. And we're very proud of this result, that it's possible to do open science with ability, with personality, with interests, with open statistics. And we also try to publish, we put up our data on the web, our results on the web. We want to report open data. This is the exciting thing in science. It should be an open field. Science is so exciting. And it should be open to everybody. And anybody can take our data and play with it, try to figure out alternative hypotheses and better results from our data. We share that. Outside my area, I think some of the work in biology is really exciting. That the work in behavior genetics has just revolutionized psychology, in the sense that we used to think that the environment was, and we still think the environment's very important, but we used to think it was the family environment that was important. Well, it turns out the environment's very important, but it's probably not not the shared family environment that's important. What's important is both your genetic background, but also the unique environment that you're in. That each person has their own experiences, and those individual experiences are very important in shaping your long-term stable measures of personality and ability. And that's not such a new work. I mean, the genetics work has been coming out for 20 years now, 30 years, but the impact of it is becoming much more clearer. And it's also, what's interesting about some of the genetic work is you can use it to measure inequalities. Because in the United States, for instance, the heritability of intelligence is much higher among the wealthy than it is among the poor. So you get a differential heritability across social class. Whereas in the UK, much of Europe and Australia, that doesn't exist. And what this partly implies is that there's much more inequity in the United States across social class. Because if the heritability goes down, well, a better way to put it, the higher the heritability, the more equal the environments. And so having the heritability change as a function of social class implies a great change in inequality across social economic status. Whereas you're not seeing that so much in the UK or in Australia.